Hello. A film called Star Wars was released into the cinema in 1977, and it was promoted, well, fairly well, really. I remember going to the cinema to see it as a teenager in Australia, which is where I was living that year. It turned out to be quite popular, and a lot was written about it at the time to push it into public consciousness. It was described as a space opera created and directed by George Lucas, who in 1967 graduated with a Fine Arts BA in film, intending to join the Air Force as an officer, but was refused as he had too many speeding tickets. Instead, he worked for the United States Information Agency, and later, when he was teaching documentary cinematography to a class of US Navy students, he also made a 15-minute film, Electronic Labyrinth, THX 1138 4EB, which later in 1971 he would remake into his first feature film, THX 1138. The US Navy there had an arrangement with USC, including unlimited colour film stock and processing for USC students, for US Navy students learning at USC, which is probably why Lucas offered to teach the class. George Lucas worked with Verna Fields, the USC film editing teacher, and later very much in-demand film editor. Star Wars the film is set far, far away in space, where many civilizations are aware of each other and mix. And it was also set a long, long time ago, as well as far, far away, which is quite convenient. One of the pivotal story features is a force called the Force, which is an unidentified kind of energy that permeates life, the universe, and everything. Lucas plugged this idea into the story because he wanted to awaken a certain kind of spirituality in his young audience. Which kind of spirituality is unspecified, but it's one of those good and evil dualities rather than a single-ended kind where you get more or less amounts of good, and where there's a lack of any good at all, that's simply zero rather than evil. Of course, whether there can ever be a maximum level of good in either scheme is a question that we shan't address here because it's out of scope. I would parallel Lucas's notion of the Force with Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance idea, which proposes that memory is inherent in nature, systems in nature exhibit a collective memory, and that there is an interconnection between organisms due to this. Sheldrake notes that a lot of religious and spiritual ideas, such as Carl Jung's collective unconscious, pivot on there being a kind of force only comprehensible from a spirit rather than a matter-based understanding. Of course, the principle of charge is the foundation of electronics and physics, but static electricity, in my opinion, is surprisingly neglected. I would put a bit more thought into fully exploring all that what we now call static electricity has to offer. In my opinion, Lucas should have considerably de-emphasised the idea of the Force in his Star Wars story, as I think it allows him to get away with almost anything inexplicably, rather than put any real effort into developing a more complex and engaging character ensemble in this space opera originally inspired by Flash Gordon. Lucas originally tried buying the Flash Gordon rights, but Dino De Laurentiis had them. So Lucas decided, well, if I can't get it, I'm going to write my own. So he dug down to what influenced the original Flash Gordon newspaper comic strips. Now this turned out to be the works of Edgar Rice Burroughs, who created Tarzan, particularly a series of books called John Carter of Mars. Burroughs was obviously a science fiction fan. When developing the idea for the space opera, Lucas was inspired by the Nixon-era politics, particularly the Vietnam War. A synopsis was eventually arrived at called The Journal of the Whills. It's W-H, so you've got to pronounce it Whills. He then found that people found it too complex to understand, so he worked on a simpler treatment called The Star Wars, which had parallels to Kurosawa's 1958 film The Hidden Fortress. Fortunately, Lucas's earlier film, THX 1138, was not a success because it was so stunningly boring and flat. So he did the opposite here and made his space opera much dirtier and brighter and colourful and, in most ways, more positive. A lot has been made of the connection between the story within Star Wars and the ideas pushed around by Joseph Campbell and his The Hero with 1,000 Faces and his monomyth ideas. Those concepts, Campbell's monomyth it's a clumsy, in my opinion anyway, it's a clumsy, hardly credible construction that attempts to shoehorn in almost every story or myth into a single structure, and claiming that anything and everything is equivalent to some part of this messy journey, the monomyth journey. Again, it's spiritual, so you can't really contest it. But it does parallel Jungian archetypes a lot. And the character Chewbacca was based on Lucas's dog, Indiana, who would sit in Lucas's passenger seat of his car quite a lot, like a co-pilot. Only during production was Luke's character renamed from Starkiller to Skywalker, and the name of the space opera itself changed from The Star Wars to just Star Wars. Actually, I've got a slide of... Let me just have a look. Yeah, this is Joseph Campbell, monomyth, hero with 1,000 faces. As I say, I don't find it a very credible theory. So that was The Star Wars, or as it later became called, Star Wars. I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, please subscribe and like and send it around to anybody you'd like to participate in this. And have a very good Friday, have a very good weekend, enjoy yourself. Thank you very much. Goodbye.